welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Welcome to Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. This is Jessica. I am here with this is her maiden voyage. My librarian co-host, please introduce yourself. Tell everyone who you are.
Hi, my name is Kay. I started at Syosset 3 months ago, unbelievably. This is my first podcast, but I have been in a couple of TikToks so far for the library. And I'm part of the Reader Services Department, so my main job is to get books into readers' hands.
Oh, Reader's Advisory is the best.
The best.
When I was a librarian, that was what I longed to do, but instead I troubleshot our 40 public computers mostly.
I wanted to ask you about your public librarianship, but I think Jessica has a question for you.
No, we're going to jump right into it. Actually, that's a really good jumping off part, but our author today, please tell us who you are and about the books you write, and then we're going to just dive right into this because we're both very excited.
I'm Olivia Dade. I write romantic comedies that are hopefully funny but also emotional and a little bit goofy and hot. So all of those things sort of put together. My most recent release was Shipwrecked, which was last November, and I just have the pre-orders up for my one for early next year called At First Spite, which is the beginning of a new series.
So were you a reference librarian? Did you only work with adults? You said you wanted to do Reader's Advisory, which is really cool. Tell me about it. I'm just so interested in this part of your life.
I worked in libraries for about 5 years. I started out at a small rural branch where in theory I was actually a children's reference librarian. So I did story times, which was great fun. And where I'm pretty certain I should not have been hired for that because I said I was a teacher. And I was, and I did not lie, but I also did not point out that I was a high school teacher, which is very different. But so I think that helped get me the job. They never asked, and I did not lie about it, but I did say that I had teaching experience, and I think that assisted. Anyway, so I did that, but at the small rural branches, you basically do everything. So I did, circulation, circ work. I did adult reference too. We helped with the public computers. We checked in stuff in the book drop. And usually the book drop is where you get the filthiest things returned because people are ashamed. So they just put them in the book drop. So sticky, slimy, crusty things. You're just what is that on there? We'll never know. Anyway, so I worked there. And then I actually transferred after a couple of years to sort of the central branch, which was I lived in Maryland. It was in Hagerstown, Maryland. So it was sort of in the middle of, it's not a large city, but it is a city, the downtown branch, where I was an adult reference librarian. But as I said, and I did answer people's questions and Reader's Advisory. I did do some of it as much as I could, but we got assigned 40 public computers, and then we were told we were the people sort of watching over them and helping people with them, which is great. I mean, it's necessary for the community. We have a significant homeless population where they're applying for jobs, or it's just a means of recreation that they need. It's great, except that then we sort of I felt like I became more tech support. And that was not actually what I wanted to do. And luckily I had begun writing. And so in about 2014, 2015, I sort of pulled the plug on that because it wasn't what I wanted to do anymore. I wasn't actually dealing with books very much. And I really wanted to deal with books.
So one thing we really want to know, because your first book in the Spoiler Alert series deals with a 36-year-old professional woman who cosplays and writes fan fiction. First of all, thank you for all of that. Tell us a little bit about that. Did you write fan fiction? Obviously you're super geeky and we love it.
I did not write fan fiction. It's a completely, and I have not. It's a completely different skill set to me from writing, sort of making up your own stories. And I, one is not somehow better than the other. It takes a lot of work and talent to sort of immerse yourself in a world that someone else has created and someone else's characters, and be able to believably sort of pinpoint the central dynamic, the way of communicating of those characters, and then create a story based on that. I find it easier just to do my own, and right. So it would take time and effort to learn that skill. And I instead spend the time and effort in something that might actually get me paid as much as I really appreciate what fanfic writers do. And still, went on a recent Pride and Prejudice fanfic uh binge just a few weeks ago. But the I only learned what fanfic was, which is astounding to me because I'm a lifelong shipper. Like X-Files was, but even before that, like soap operas, Days of Our Lives. But X-Files was like a formative show for me with Mulder and Scully. So I shipped, but I did not actually realize fanfic existed, which is probably for the best, or I would never have graduated college or graduate school. Um, so, right. The final season of Game of Thrones, which is a show that I did not actually watch, which is the irony of all this, right? I was on Twitter, and I am notoriously a bit of a GIF hoe, in the sense that if you have, people would post like couple GIFs, like romantic or like significant looking GIFs of a couple together. And I'm notoriously seduced by those frequently. Like, it's the reason I started watching Miss Fisher's Murder Mysteries, which I love. There was Jack and Phryne GIFs, and I was like, that, I want that. I started watching. But it was the final season, and it was before things went completely off the rails. The final season, and it was, I think, maybe the second episode. Anyway, it had Jamie Lannister and Brienne of Tarth gifts, where he's like basically making hard eyes at her, and she's like a badass in armor, and like he's sort of looking at her like she's amazing. And I was like, this dynamic looks fascinating to me. And so I was just sort of curious. And then there was another person, Kay Taylor Ray on Twitter, who said, if you're into this fandom, into this, couple, here are some fanfic recommendations. And I was like, oh, well, I've never read fanfic before, but I'll see what I think of it. And the second one I read was this story called Traveling Far by Astolat, is the name of the author. And it was incredible. It was sort of a canon divergence. Anyway, it was voicey, like really the author had a real like unique voice, and unique in a good way, not unique in the way that you say, oh, that's really unique. Like, you mean it's terrible? Like, it was wonderful unique. And it was funny, and it was sexy, and it was smart, and I was like, this was free. Like, I read this for free. And it turns out, who Astolat is? Famously, Astolat is Naomi Novik. So, who writes?
The pieces are falling into place right now. Wow.
She apparently does a ton of different fandoms, like including like maybe Transformers and stuff. But one of the fandoms that she is written in, and she wrote like 4 or 5, 6 stories in it, is the Jamie Lannister Brienne of Tarth fandom. And I read a bunch of hers all in a row, and they're incredible. And it was just really playing with different themes and ideas and sort of dynamics in the relationship that I found very appealing. And then from there, I sort of found, I started sorting through my options on Archive of Our Own by sorting by numbers of kudos. And so trying to look for what was, in theory, possibly the best of what was out there. And I found that fandom has a lot of really talented writers. And it was very fortunate for me because I was going through a stretch, like a reading slump. Because if you're someone who where reading has always been an escape from the rest of your life, and then you become a professional writer, somehow it can bring reading into the world of your work. So it's not, can sometimes be not as much of an escape as it used to be. And for a period, that was true for me. And the only thing I read for like a year and a half was Jamie Lannister, Brienne of Tarth fan fiction. Still didn't watch the show. I did watch a YouTube supercut of their relationship, which if you end it like right after they kiss, was great. Like up to that point, it reads almost like a romance novel, except for you can really get to like gloss over the twincest if it's only their scenes together, which is really preferable, I think, in my case. Anyway, so yes, so when I started thinking about the Spoiler Alert series and came up with story ideas, sorry, I circled around things for like 10 minutes before I got back to answer your question. I had sort of fanfic very sort of at the forefront of my mind, and generally whatever I've become obsessive about tends to show up in my books. I went through a period after the 2016 election where I suddenly randomly got into tennis for like a year. So I have a book called 40 Love, which involves tennis. And, you know, I'm into rock collecting. So like that shows up with April, who is a geologist, as you said, in Spoiler Alert. So all my obsessions come home to roost at some point in my writing. And so when I was thinking of story ideas, I was thinking of fanfic, and I was also thinking about what would it be like if you saw the interviews of the Game of Thrones actors for that final season. Those interviews are somewhat infamous because they look like, as I've often said, impromptu hostage videos. Like they're like, no, it's great. And maybe they really meant it and they just said it awkwardly. And I mean, genuinely, I don't know their minds, right? I don't know their lives. But it sounded like maybe that wasn't the case. And so so I was thinking, okay, well, what would happen if you were someone on this blockbuster show that is going off the rails in the final season, and you hated it. You hated the scripts. You hated what was happening to your character, but you couldn't say anything about it publicly because that's a good way to not have a career anymore in Hollywood anymore. And what if you got out your frustrations instead by writing fix-it fic, like fix-it fan fiction, you know, to show the way you think things should have gone in the show? What if you did that as for your own character? But of course, you couldn't be public about it, you know, being sort of critical of the show. And then that sort of became the basis of Marcus's character in Spoiler Alert.
I love that. And as somebody who was a Game of Thrones fan and was really upset with the last season, I when I read Spoiler Alert, I made those connections really easily. And you don't hide it. I'm not saying like, oh, like who knew? But I think that was part of the charm of reading that one, was it was kind of like, oh, yes, I agree with these people in this book. And I love that they're like writing fix-it fan fiction to like adjust where their character's trajectory is, because I can absolutely see somebody doing that. Like if I was on a show like that, I'd be like, forget this. Yeah, I'm going to write my own show and make it 10 times better than this show, because I do feel like spite is a really good motivator.
It really is.
It truly is. Not that you can do anything about it, again, professionally, like you said, because you don't want to implode your own, you know, employment or anything like that. But yeah, I think that was when I picked up Spoiler Alert when it was released a few years ago. First of all, I want to touch on the artwork on the book, because I'm a big believer that like book covers are designed for a reason. You know, you should judge a book by its cover to an extent, because the book design is meant to catch your eye. And I love the cover art on all three of your most recent novels. And I do like that a few of your past novels are getting, at least on your website, it looks like they're getting a re-release with the artwork or something like that. I have Teach Me out right now, and it has like an old cover on it.
Right.
I've been slowly making my way through your stuff. But the cover work for Teach Me, and even for 40 Love, which I'm also really excited to read, and your third Marysburg novel, whose title is escaping me right now, all of the artwork kind of looks similar to Spoiler Alert, All the Feels, and Shipwrecked. So how do you get that artwork to happen? Who's the artist? You want to talk about them a little bit?
Sure, I talk about her all the time because she's a goddess. Her name is Lenny Kaufman. I was fortunate in that Avon actually asked me, Avon is my publisher. They asked me if I had an artist in mind for the covers. And luckily, my agent had another author at Avon who had been asked the same question, Alexis Daria. If you've seen her, You Had Me at Ola and A Lot Like Adios, they're the most amazing covers. And it's, she's a Latina author, and the covers sort of reflect that and are very sort of sui generis. They're sui generis. They don't look like anything else out there, and they're beautiful. And she was sort of allowed to help guide the cover, help choose the cover artist as well. So I've been given a warning that I would be asked this. So I did a lot of research, and I looked at covers that had been done that I liked the style. One thing that I wanted to make sure it was going to be illustrated because that was just the trend. Like, so I knew that if it's a rom-com, it's going to have an illustrated cover. I also wanted to have like April, a fat woman, fat not being used as a pejorative, but simply as a descriptor, a fat woman front and center. And I did not want it to be an illustrated cover where it's sort of like small blob people. There are ones that are really lovely that have that, but it allows you to sort of elide her body. And I did not want there to be any way to get around the fact that she was fat. I want her to be fat and beautiful on the cover. And so when I was looking, I saw the cover art for Along for the Ride by Mimi Grace, and the cover artist was Lenny Kaufman. And at the time, I think she'd only done that one cover, but I loved it. And I went to her website and I looked, and what I really loved was that some of her illustrations had different body types and they were all beautiful. And I will tell you, that's not necessarily a given. There are a lot of illustrators who I think their aesthetic is like elongated, thin figures, or either for whatever reason, they have a hard time portraying fat bodies in a way that is beautiful. And I've I've seen how that can look. And I wanted someone who could see beauty in all body shapes and sizes. So I asked Lenny, well, actually, Avon asked, who do you want? I said, I want Lenny Kaufman. And this is really, I'm so grateful for it. They got her. I'm grateful she agreed. I'm grateful they got her. And then they gave me the sketch for the cover. And I was like, I believe I'll go back and make a new cover for Teach Me. And 40 Love and Sweetest in the Gale, the third book, had not come out yet. And so I was able to just from the beginning use her covers for those. And then Teach Me, I got a new cover that was going to be not exactly like the Avon covers because it's best to separate a little bit when you have different series. But in the same sort of universe, essentially, those covers, because I love them so much. And so now I've worked with Lenny on the 3 self-published covers, the Marysburg covers, and then also on the 3 books for the Spoiler Alert series, plus the special bonus dust jacket for Shipwrecked, which I actually did because I wasn't sure. Have you seen this? She made
oh my god, I'm in love with it.
I asked to do like a gender flipped old school like historical romance cover with my characters, and it's a dust jacket. It was a pre-order bonus, and she did the art for this too, and it's gorgeous. If you know Tender is the Storm by Joanna Lindsay, it's sort of probably the most famous old school romance cover because I mean he's naked. Well, he was until there was some uproar, so then they put like a sticker over his butt. And, or there's one where like they draw like little panties on him. It's hilarious. Anyway, but he's naked and like she's positioned in a really interesting way against him. But anyway, so I gender flipped it, and actually she's the one who's naked, although her hair is covering like any bits that would get me banned somewhere. And right, she did a beautiful job on that. So I've worked with Lenny quite a bit, Now she's doing she does a ton of covers now, and they're all gorgeous. And she is a goddess, and she can find beauty in all different types of people, and translate that into her art in a way which is not always the case.
I just did a quick scroll through her website, and yeah, I could see exactly what you're talking about. All the book covers, different body shapes, body skin tones, and different people of all shapes and sizes. I love that. And now I have a whole other list of books I need to read.
She does amazing work. I'm just so, like, she's a lovely person, and she does beautiful work. I'm so grateful that, I found her. I'm so grateful Avon was willing to, because a lot of times you get the cover you get with limited input, and they have given me a lot of input on this cover and my upcoming cover too. So
nice. Yeah. Also, a lot of her books I'm noticing are on our staff picks. So amazing. Like I said, the book cover means something, like that.
It does. Yeah.
The Ashley Herring Blake books are fantastic, of course. And I'm sure those are in your staff picks. And
they are.
There's lots of great stuff she's doing.
Yeah. All right. On that note too, I had a question written down, and then I was trolling through your blog last night to get ready for this. My question was about like what got you started with romance, and like what was your first romance novel that you read. And then I went on your blog and noticed that you started reading romance when you were 7, which I think is fascinating. I want to hear about that story, and where it got you started, and your trajectory from there.
Well, my mom read romance, and as is often the case, had a pile of books in her closet that I was not supposed to read. So as soon as she left me unsupervised, I dove headfirst into that pile. And I was a very early reader and a good reader. And so technically I could read all those books. There was a lot that I did not understand until much, much later. A lot of throbbing. I'm like, where's the throbbing coming from? I'm not certain, but like there's a lot of throbbing and fireworks randomly in waves. And there's a lot of euphemisms. Anyway, right. So she read a lot of historical romance with like spunky virgins and pirates, and a lot of dubious consent or non-consent, which was kind of the way a lot of things were back then. Although if you read contemporary romance, you could find ones that were more sort of consent focused, and she did have a few of those, which ended up being more what I gravitated toward. Why I was drawn to them, because from that point on, like, when I grew up, I'm 46, so I was born in 76, so it was like mid 80s. They had in the early 90s, they had like Silhouette First Love, so they had like YA teen basically romances. There was the Sunfire series, which were basically YA historical romances, which the Scholastic Fairs always had. There was always a female name, and then it was set her in different periods, these different women in different periods of US history, and then she always had to choose between 2 guys, which now I'm like, why do you have to choose? But at the time, she had to choose. But it was basically a historical romance with training wheels. So like if that was what you were into, like you could basically ride that all the way into adult romance, although I was already there as well. I think, in complete honesty, I think that part of the reason it appealed so much to me is because I had fraught family dynamics. And I really liked the comfort of knowing that in the end, things would be good, and that it was possible to have sort of a healthy, loving relationship on page, and a devoted relationship on page. And it was a story that I needed to read repeatedly, because, if you have your home, and to counterbalance that, you need to hear it again. Like once is not enough. And I genuinely credit the fact that like I married someone was super into me and like really good to me, because I was willing to stay single if I was more than happy to stay single if I didn't find someone who treated me the way that, not exactly like, I mean, I'm not a fool. Like, I know that romances are fiction, right? But the central dynamic of having someone who just genuinely really loved me and not settling for less than someone who adored me, like that that I attribute to reading romances my entire life.
I love that.
Me too. I mean, that's like, this is what I love sometimes when like we do these chats and they take sort of a different shape than the original question. That is amazing.
And as somebody who just started getting into romance novels, and spoiler alert, was like one of my first adult rom-coms. Before this, I was a teen librarian, so I read mostly YA stuff, all YA stuff, mostly queer books, mostly fantasy. And then again, the cover of spoiler alert, I was like, there's a fat person in this book. I must read this. I don't see this ever. You know, we never, at least, I mean, I'm sure there were others, but yours was my first. And ever since then, I agree. I think what really gets me into them is that I know that it's going to end happily at the end. And like, that's the kind of escape that I need. I need the escape where everything is okay.
Right.
And especially in the last couple of years, you know, I think I picked up spoiler alert or when we were still in lockdown or pandemic was happening or something. And I was like, I need a comfort book. Here it is.
I think romance readership really grew during the pandemic. I mean, I think that I also struggle with anxiety. There is something to be said for knowing that no matter what sort of travails the characters are going through, that in the end, it's going to be okay. And I think it was something that people need to hear during the pandemic, that like things will be hard, but in the end, it'll be okay, which is obviously not true for everyone, but like I think it was something that a lot of people. And can I put in my plug for romance as a genre and why it's
Yes.
amazing?
Yes.
Is that I mean, that is literally the only thing, the only requirement of the romance genre is that it ends happily. Otherwise, it encompasses all other genres in a way that is not true of other genres, because there are science fiction romances and there are fantasy romances and there are romances with mysteries, there's romantic suspense, there are romantic thrillers, there are romances set in a zombie apocalypse, there are romances that are set like back in medieval like Ireland, whatever setting, time period, tone that you want, it is encompassed within romance. The only thing that is required is that, there be a central relationship or relationships. Doesn't even have to be a pairing. It can be a throuple or more than that. The only requirement is that relationship end with some sort of happy, at least for the moment, and that things sort of end on a relatively positive note. Not everything needs to be wrapped up and perfect, but at least within the relationship, you get the sense that at least for now, they're going to be happy. That's all it requires. And it's amazing because I read the whole gamut. I read historical romance, I read sci-fi romance, and I read contemporary romance, and I read occasionally YA, steamy, kisses only, the whole gamut. And it's great. It encompasses every other genre in a way that I just love.
Have you ever thought about writing like a sci-fi romance or anything else? I mean, not that you should stop writing contemporary romance because I love them. And like I said, I have Teach Me Out right now. I haven't started it yet because I've been distracted with another romance series, which I'm not going to plug because I don't want to talk about it right now. But have you ever thought about doing any other like genre mixes with romance in the future?
I have actually written, they will never leave my hard drive, but I have written actually 2 futuristic romances. They were sort of very early in my writing career, and I think my writing has hopefully evolved enough since then that I think their time has passed. The book I'm working on now, I'm only 11,000 words into it, is a paranormal romance. So, and hopefully I have ideas for at least 2 stories in it. So hopefully building a world out and then, having multiple stories set in it. So that's what I'm working on right now and having fun with it because my brain likes doing different things. And so it's actually very refreshing for me to write sort of a different world. And the challenges of different subgenres of romance have different essential challenges, because the central question you have to ask, or one of them, is what is keeping these two people apart? Now, in historical romances, there's all sorts of like legal issues, and like, there's a lot of potential for what would keep two people apart because of propriety or whatever, right? Different mores, right? I think the central challenge of historical romances is research. If you want to do a romance that is accurate to the time, you don't have to. There are what are called so-called wallpaper historicals, where they're historicals, but they're not too concerned about being super accurate. You have sci-fi fantasy romances where I think the essential challenge is world building, right? That's what you got to really spend a lot of your time on, because there's often external obstacles then in the world building to keep the characters apart. And the central problem with contemporary romance, or central challenges, we're living in like 2023 right now. If you like someone, like, why can't you just be together? And so you have to come up with plausible reasons why they actually cannot be together, which is harder if you're not like in an apocalypse or or like in Regency London. It is harder. So part of the beauty of writing this paranormal romance for me is that I get to do something that's more about world building, rather than sort of like internal conflict. This is more external conflict. I'll be frank, there are zombies. So there's external conflict, and they can be more of a battle couple, where it's like them against an outside, threat, versus necessarily it always being sort of about their own hang-ups and issues. My goal for this one is that I don't, like, usually I try to put a lot of emotion in my contemporary romances. It's not that I don't want to have emotion in this, but like, I don't really want anyone to cry. Like, I don't want to cry writing it. I don't want to cry reading it. I just want it to be like entertaining and like well written and fun. Like, I'm not too worried about like wrenching your heart out. This one, except in like a zombie sense. Like, I'm not as interested in that. And that's really nice, because my book that's coming up next year that just went to copy edits, I love it. I think it's maybe the best thing that I have ever written, but it was like a true book of my heart. But there was a lot of like, I think there's some stuff in there I think emotionally it was a difficult book. And so I was like, you know what? We're gonna do, this is what I've called this for the moment. I don't know what it'll end up being. A Zom rom-com. It would be pretty like,
Patent that. Nobody else. You're the first. .com.
So I mean, it's really truly very fun for me, because I'm not trying to like they can have obviously they'll have backstories, and I want them to feel like real people, but like I don't have to like dig in deep on like personal angst, like, because they have zombies to deal with. Like, and generally my characters don't. So
I was going to agree with you that a lot of contemporary romance is definitely like character versus self. It's a lot of, they talk themselves out of like being in love, or they talk themselves like, I can't be with so and so because of XYZ. And it's usually like, a lot of times they need a secondary character to be like, it's in your head, or they have to like come to that conclusion on their own. It's funny you brought up your next book coming out next year in February, because I wanted to segue into that.
Okay.
Houses.
Yes.
What was that your current obsession? So you needed to write about it?
I keep a file of story ideas, and sometimes those story ideas might be a paragraph or two. Sometimes those story ideas might be a single word, such as, for several years, I have had Zom rom-com as a story idea. That was all I had before I started obviously planning the book. And one of the things I had several years ago, I think the one in Boston was for sale. It came up on Twitter somehow. And I was like, what's a spite house? And I read the article about it. I was like, somewhere, sometime, I have to use this. So that was years ago, but that had been in my story ideas folder. So when I was coming up with the premise for a new series and a new book, I looked through my story ideas folder just to see, like, is there anything here that still feels like something I want to do now that feels urgent? And I was like, oh, Spite House. And so I was like, well, how do I make that work? Like, what's the, and so that's how I came up. How does that play into like the plot and the conflict? And then once I came up with that, I had a premise for a book.
I only told Jessica about the Spite House book like 10 minutes before we logged on with you today, and she was like, what? So I think we're both excited to read it.
So cool. Yeah, I was so excited. I forgot to do our little signal for who wanted to talk. Yeah, no, that's so cool. And I really just like the whole premise. So what is a Spite House, really quickly, for those who do not know?
There's more than one Spite House. The one I sort of was focused on was the one in Boston. The series is not set in Boston, but I'm using that as sort of the setup of the Boston one is basically my example. A Spite House is a dwelling that is built for purposes of spite. In this particular, the one in Boston, and this will give you an example of sort of what I'm talking about. It's possibly an apocryphal story. It's unclear whether this is actually the truth, but the story is that it's a set of row houses, and there was a plot of land on the end given to two brothers around the time of the Civil War, and that one of those brothers went off to fight the Confederacy, and when he got back, his other brother had built a house on almost all the land, leaving him a little 10-foot wide sliver of land, which of course you can't really build on because it's only 10 feet wide. Unless, of course, you are incredibly pissed that your brother took most of your land when you were off fighting the Confederacy. And so built that last 10 feet, built a 10-foot wide house on, basically attached to his brother's house because it was row homes, thus depriving his brother of most of his light, his airflow, like you can't have the entrance on the side anymore. Basically, like, so is built out of spite, to basically make it so that, sure, you have your home, but I'm gonna make it like a lot less good by doing this. And there are other houses that are built, like there's one like this wedge-shaped house that's built like to block a view, like the neighbors were fighting, and like there's all sorts of different reasons. There are different houses built this way, but my sort of my vision of how it would look was actually how the Boston Spite House looks. That's set up so that my female main character Athena is surrounded on one side. She's in the Spite House, poor thing, for reasons. And on one side, she has her ex-fiance who just dumped her a month before the wedding through one brick wall. And then across a narrow alleyway, she has her ex-fiance's older brother, who is the one who convinced her fiance to leave her a month before the wedding. And she decides her fiance's off on their honeymoon by himself, her dream honeymoon in Hawaii. And she decides to get a little of her own back against the older brother who convinced her ex to leave her. Unfortunately, she begins to like really kind of like him. and then things go on from there. But it was I love the book. I think it is that and All the Feels, I think, are probably my best work, like character work, especially to date. And Athena, I wanted to write a messier female main character because most of my female main characters are like pretty, like they have their, excuse my language, they have their shit together. And like, I wanted someone who is smart and like funny and, but is just lost in a lot of ways, like has failed significantly in their life, in their head, who's angry and who's sad and still funny. I think the book is really funny, but she's depressed and does not actually recognize it until a good chunk of the way through the book. She's kind of denying it to herself. And it was important to me to sort of, I think it's a really good book. Like I'm happy with it. It was a good book to write. It was a hard book to write emotionally, but it was I really am happy with how it came out.
This has been so much fun. I had a very quick question.
Sure.
Names, where do you come up with them? Because I love them. Like, all of your names are really cool, especially now that I know that the next book has a character named Athena.
I if I hear a name that I think that sounds like a good future name for like a protagonist, I put it in my story ideas folder. So like my file, so like I knew, so I can go through and sort of pick and choose. Because frankly, as a former teacher, there are certain names I cannot use for the male main characters because they are way too associated for me with like some of the kids, especially the students who were the most problematic. I'm like, I can never have someone with that name as a lead character. So, but if there are ones that appeal to me, then I do it that reason. Occasionally, I will look up the one that I'm writing. The male main character is supposed to be hundreds of years old, and I was thinking that he was from the French territories, maybe around the time when it was maybe medieval. I'm not sure. I went back to Gaul, but and I was like, okay, so what are some medieval French male names? And then I look through, and for one that I can pronounce, I know how to pronounce, and it seems like it would work. So, and actually, I got a little minor story idea from doing that because one of the medieval male French names was Gaston. And I was like, that would be hilarious if you were like this hundreds of years old vampire who, like, Gaston was a fine name for a long time, and then somewhere during when Beauty and the Beast came out on Disney, it became a name you could no longer use because everyone would start singing the song. No one fights like Gaston. Anyway, so yes. So it depends on the character. I have my lists for contemporary stuff. For other things, sometimes I have to do a little research on, on name origins.
That explains the names of your characters. Do any of your characters come from like people you've met or like from yourself? I know a lot of writers like take personality traits from themselves and like put them into their characters. Have you ever done that? Or have you ever like, I mean, I've also done that thing where I'm writing a story, I need a villain name, let me pick somebody I hate and I'll use their name and stick it in the story. I'm blanking again on the character's name, but there's that one character you have through all three, spoiler alert, all the feels that all the other characters.
Oh, Ian.
Ian, there you go. The yogurt guy. Or no, the tuna guy. That's what it is. He likes tuna. Fish all the time.
I don't think I've ever used a person from my life as an antagonist name. I usually try to choose names for the antagonist that I would never want, that I don't like. Like, not because I don't like a person, but I just don't like those names as a protagonist, like a main female protagonist or male protagonist name. As far as there's parts of me in almost every character, either a part of my life experience, my professional experience, my emotional, like an emotional sort of way of thinking, or there's more or less of me somewhere in all the characters, including the male characters. It's not just female characters. I mean, I think, interestingly, the character who is least like me was probably my most fun to write, because I am nothing like Alex from All the Feels, who is like a chaos demon, and he's just completely, he feels everything to like 1,000% and is completely unembarrassed to like feel emotion and show emotion, and he's amazing and I love him, and he's nothing like me, and he was so much fun to write. And I mean, I enjoy writing people who are more like me too, but it was really refreshing actually to write somewhere I'm like, this is nothing like what I am. But it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I feel like Alex is like a sweet cinnamon roll. That's like too good for this world, but in the best way. And I actually, it's funny you bring him up because I wanted to tell you, in my trolling through your website, I found the peg that was promised, and I read that last night and enjoyed it immensely. I knew it existed, and then I like forgot about it because I am like Alex, so I was kind of like, oh, it's out of my periphery, don't remember about it. And I love that yesterday, as I was looking through your stuff, you had updated your website, and there was another story from the Spoiler Alert series about Kara and Summer. And of course, I devoured that in one sitting too. And I wanted to ask you if you were going to do any queer romance, and I kind of have my answer.
I mean, I think I like to preserve room in publishing for people who, you know, who are actually queer. I'm like cis, mostly het, but like for people who identify more as queer, for them to actually, because let's face it, I think most publishers are more willing to write books, to publish books by straight people writing queer love stories or white people writing like BIPOC characters than they are to actually pay money and publish like queer authors and BIPOC authors. So like, you know, I don't want to take up space. I try to be a platform to sort of like rave about those books rather than necessarily sort of infringe myself on it. But yeah, I mean, I really enjoy writing Kara and Summer's story, and I do like dealing with. I am, to put it mildly, not a big fan of gender essentialism, and so like I want my male main characters, I do not want them to be toxically masculine. Like I know toxic masculinity, so I play with gender, but and try to have diverse side characters. But probably I'm not sure I would do a full length queer romance simply because I don't think I would rather support queer authors in writing queer romance.
That's super fair. And again, I'm just happy when I got to the end of Shipwrecked, when they were like, oh yeah, Kara and Summer are now a thing. I was like, wait, where's the story behind that? I love that existed. And then, like I said, you published that extra chapter, you gave it to us. And I was like, excellent, now I'm satisfied. So you have satisfied at least one reader. You can be happy with that.
I am glad. Yeah, I just put it up. Yeah, I spent all day yesterday and the day before updating website and doing admin stuff. So there's, yep, a lot of stuff happened yesterday.
I got really lucky. I just happened to be on there just looking to find questions for my little cheat sheet. And I was like, there's new stuff. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm glad you enjoyed the pegging scene. I am proud of the fact that I think I will remain for a long time Avon's only pre-order bonus, official pre-order bonus that has involved pegging. So, you know, it was meant to be sort of a running joke at first, and then Spoiler Alert came out and Goodreads listed all the feels, and like all the initial comments were like, this better have pegging in it. Hundreds of likes. And I told my editor, I'm like, no, I think like genuinely I need to have a pegging scene. She's like, oh, ha ha ha. And then her good friend read Spoiler Alert and was like, where's the pegging scene? Like, there better be a pegging scene. She's like, oh, I guess there is. But all the feels ran super long, like super long. I had to cut 30,000 words. It was 133,000. I had to cut down to 103. So like there just was not, they have sex toward the end of the book, and they would not have been comfortable like going straight to pegging. Lauren, well, Alex would have been all for it, but Lauren needed a little bit of time, and so it didn't make sense in the timeline. And by that time, I was like, I have no room left in this story. Like I can't put this in. But that's why I wrote as a pre-order bonus. My editor was like, yeah, you probably should like, have that be the pre-order bonus for all the feels.
I want to personally thank your editor.
I was like, you know, I couldn't think of it as like the thing people ask me for most. That is it. The pegging that was promised.
That is a really great place to close out, I think.
I want to say one more thing because I'm not.
Do.
Hey, did you appreciate the title of the pegging story too? Do you know about it?
Yes, I knew about it. I loved it. I didn't know about it before I read all the feels. Right. I knew about it after the fact.
But I was very pleased with the title, Chekhov's Strap-On.
Love that. Well, because like Alex mentions, like he has a bunch of titles going on in his head because when he starts writing fan fiction, he starts making these jokes. So it makes perfect sense. It was beautiful.
Yeah. Sorry, Jessica.
No, thank you so much. That was honestly, I'm not going to complain about that. Thank you so much. This was wonderful. Check out.
I have one
Go
more
ahead.
thing. I'm sorry, I forgot.
Yes.
Speaking of all the feels, really quick. Am I ever gonna get a hag shirt? Are you ever gonna make merch that says something about being an enthusiastic hag?
Oh, right. That was something we really needed to know.
I really needed to ask. I have it starred on my sheet.
I have not made the merch because I am not I'm not the world's savviest businesswoman. I would say I worked for like nonprofit institutions until I started writing, and I became like, I guess, a for-profit institution. So I have not designed my own merch. Briefly, there was a reader friend of mine who did design some merch on Etsy, but I bought all of it because I was like, hey, but she closed it up. I know that occasionally I get other readers who told me that they've like made shirts. There was one that was like somebody gave me a link the other day for like their shop. I was particularly fond of the design for proud graduate of the Harpy Institute for Crone Sciences. Which I thought
that's the shirt I need. That's the one.
Yeah.
I very much like that shirt too. In fact, I feel like we should have like team numbers on the back too. Right? It should be like one of those baseball shirts that has like, numbers.
Yeah, I have been asked about the merch thing. I probably should at some point do that, but it's not. I would probably enjoy it. I like artsy stuff, but I guess for me, for a long time, it felt kind of presumptuous to say that like anyone would want to buy stuff with my, book characters or stuff from my books on it. And I think that's probably why I sort of hesitated, but it probably is something I should do at some point.
I'll keep an eye out for it. I'm gonna start looking through Etsy, see if I can find some good stuff. That's a great suggestion.
Well, again, this was great. Totally give us a heads up if that merch comes out before your next book, because we'd love to talk to you about your next book when that comes out.
Okay, I'm happy to chat with you. It's been lovely. First of all, it's been lovely chatting with you, and I had a great time. I would be delighted to chat with you whenever.
Awesome. So once again, this was Jessica with Turn the Page podcast. Our my librarian co-host was,
and I'm Kay, the librarian co-host.
And our special guest today was
Olivia Dade, and I hope wherever you are, you're having a wonderful day.
Thank you. And we are going to close this chapter of Turn the Page.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.